Hi, everyone. I'm Jim Christian, founder and CEO of Cornerstone, and welcome to Behind the Barricade. So if you're new here, this podcast is all about asking one question. Why does construction productivity keep staying flat even after all the technology and tools we've been given over the last couple of decades? We wanted to find the people who actually are breaking through that ceiling, the ones getting results, and sit down with them. No theory, no fluff, just what's actually working in real projects right now. And I got to tell you, today's guest is someone I've been looking forward to introducing to you ever since I met her a few months ago. Jenny Kim is the Director of Store Development at Canada Goose North America. She came up through architecture in New York City, worked on high-rise residential towers, made the jump into luxury retail, cut her teeth at YSL, and now she's leading strategic rollouts for one of the most recognized brands in the world. And here's what I love about this conversation. Jenny tells us about a store opening outside of Chicago that hit a real wall nobody saw coming. Government shutdown, delays stacking up, a hard deadline that could not move, the decision she made to save the project. She never had done it before. She called it a leap of faith. I'm not going to spoil it, but I'll tell you this. It saved her about 3 months on the schedule. She also gets real honest about something I think a lot of us feel, but don't always say out loud. The tension between sustainability goals and the reality of working inside luxury retail. Her take on this is refreshingly real. And there's a moment where she talks about reading every single page of her architect's drawings. And that one habit changes the entire dynamic of accountability on a project. There is a lot of gold in this one. So let's get into it. Here's my conversation with Jenny.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jim Christian, founder and CEO of Cornerstone, and this is Behind the Barricade, a podcast dedicated to exploring how we achieve performance breakthroughs on construction projects. And I'm really excited to introduce you to our guest today. Jenny Kim is the Director of Store Development at Canada Goose North America. Met Jenny a few months ago, and as soon as I met her, I knew that she was going to be an awesome podcast guest, and really looking forward to this conversation with you, Jenny. Thanks so much for taking the time out of your busy day to spend a little time on the podcast and tell us about performance breakthroughs that you've experienced in your role. But before we get started, maybe tell us a little bit about how you got in the industry and life is like for you at Canada Goose these days.
Yeah. Hi. Thanks for having me on this podcast. A little bit about myself. I actually come from architecture background, started my career in architecture design and kind of happened to come into retail by chance. I started working at a New York City design firm, working on a mixed-use retail studio under a female director, working on a condominium project for quite some time and built my career working on high residential towers in New York City and working through multiple buildings, endless hours, designing options and working through Revit models till midnight. I got really fed up at a certain point and decided to look for other opportunities and ended up landing on a role in real estate development through a colleague of mine. And it really opened up into an opportunity working in a bigger team, leading a consultant-based project management of multiple consultants, working through lawyers, consultant team of MEPs, interior design teams, civil engineering. And I think that's where I really thrived working with cross-functional teams. And that's where I really thought, okay, this is where my passion is. So I started looking through multiple options of, okay, where do I really want to align my career? And that's when my mentor was like, you should be really looking at commercial. So I started looking at other opportunities and ended up kind of landing on a role at luxury retail
Okay.
at SL.
Okay.
So that has been my career ever since then in luxury retail.
Wow, great. So what's a typical day like looking like for you these days?
A lot of multiple hats, not in just retail build outs, but in Canada Goose specifically, I wear many hats. I think I do a lot of real estate as well as construction design, a lot of, I guess, execution and real estate development at this
Yeah.
point. So a lot of design management, but also at the same time, construction management at this point. In North America specifically, there's a lot of happening and strategic rollouts specifically because we're at a moment where the brand is at a pivotal shift right now. So we're looking at strategic growth in North America. We're looking at multiple locations where we want to grow. So right now in current position, we're looking at where do we want to open in the next 5 years. So in current role, I'm looking at strategic real estate locations, but also at the same time focusing on current construction projects, successfully opening locations
Looking
on
at
budget.
today, but
And
also looking at 5 years.
yes, that's obviously important. So yeah, it's a lot of many things currently.
I get the sense that I often think of us in construction that we're professional plate spinners. We got all these plates going, and we got to keep
Yeah.
spinning them and making sure none hit the floor at
Yeah.
once, or any of them hit the floor. Well, that's great, Jenny. It sounds like an exciting entry into the industry, and kind of cool how you've grown and your growth has happened as well. So on the podcast, we really try to get grassroots insights on breakthroughs in performance on construction projects, whether that's through design or the actual construction cycle, or overall, how does a successful project, when we see real performance breakthroughs happen, what's the secret sauce? What's the secret ingredients? Because one of the reasons we started the podcast was we've been looking at construction productivity trends over the last couple of decades. And despite all the technology advantages that we've been given, productivity still kind of remains flat over the last couple of decades. So just trying to explore through the podcast, like what makes it successful? So love you to share where you have had success in really seeing productivity breakthroughs in a project. I don't know if you want to talk about a specific project or more of a higher level, but just love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah. Recent project that I actually just completed and went through a crazy, I want to say, hurdle. I want to say a force majeure. There was a recent US government shutdown that happened a couple months ago. I recently opened a store in outskirts of Chicago that got severely delayed due to government shutdown, and had to really open by a certain date. Obviously, with commercial retail, there is a peak season that we would have to open, and that coincides with holiday season. In order for us to kind of hit that peak season, we had to really meet those dates without a doubt. So in order for us to meet those dates, I had to really come up with multiple solutions to navigate through multiple hurdles. And that really made me think outside the box, which made me really come to a decision which I've never done in the past, where it started with procurement. So when we went out to bid, I actually started thinking about procuring storefront from the get-go. Even without having a GC on board, I decided to actually engage a storefront vendor early on and decided to fabricate storefront from day one because we had the site ready and had the site demoed early on. I decided to get my AOR survey and have the hold to dimension and do a leap of faith and decide to go measure the hold to dimension and let's fabricate, because I think that's the longest lead time and that's what makes or breaks my retail storefront build all the time. I've been burned many times in the past. So I think that was one of my leap of faith on this one. And that's what really saved my job at the end. This one really worked out for me at the end, and I think it was pretty successful. And I did end up opening the store on time, which was a miracle, with the crazy change orders at the end, but still made it up. Yeah.
If you're able to share, how did you handle that contractually? It sounds like you did that maybe even before you had gone out for bid with the GC. So what was the mechanics of that for you? And did you find that storefront vendor?
Yeah, so my AOR actually had vendor that they previously worked with. It was a recommendation from my AOR. And what we ended up doing as a client was we had engaged the storefront vendor as a design assist. So we had contracted them as a design assist scope only. And then we had them paid on a contract basis. And then once they started the fabrication, and by then we had the GC on board. So we transferred their contract under the GC and then had the GC carry rest of the contract, which actually I've done that before with a different brand in the past, which again, typically I think the GC will be okay with. I've done that in the past in US. I'm not sure how Canadian GCs will handle that, but I think a lot of times with long lead items like storefront and bigger projects like flagships in Miami Design District in the past, I've done that as well. It does happen quite a bit. So I do think that it helps to keep things running quite a bit.
How much time do you think that saved you? How much more time would construction have slipped if you hadn't made that decision early
I
on?
think at least 3 months.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I think a lot of times what really is a pinch point in luxury retail, especially, is a lot of these storefront designs are very bespoke, right? So it's not your typical storefront profile. It's very much, the really specific, knife edge bends or very detailed curved glass details that are really hard to achieve. So long lead time items that require very detailed fabrication. And I think that's what really takes time and requires R&D.
And it really formed, sounds like a real partnership between you, the architect, and that
Yeah.
firm, like kind of all pushing towards the same goal and with the same timeline.
Yeah, yeah. And I think for us with Canada Goose, like since we are rolling out a net new design for our brand and our store design, our concept architect had to be involved and they had to really sit through the R&D and the new concept of the storefront design. So there was a lot of approval process that had to be involved with the Oak Brook project. So again, I think new idea of rolling out storefront early on really helped us to get to the finish line. But I do think that thinking outside the box, kind of putting storefront at the early phase of the construction project did work out.
Worked out.
Yeah.
Where would you have made that decision in the design? Like, how early did you make that decision that that was the direction you were going to go?
Well, I want to say probably towards end of DD. And I think this was a suggestion actually done by our AOR.
That's cool. That's
Yeah, and
cool.
our AOR is a really good, strong partner of ours. And they also have a ton of experience in luxury retail. They've done other high luxury brand retails. And I think they also learned their lessons in the past, going through multiple brands and multiple GCs. And they've experienced a lot of delays with storefronts and they're seeing it through their own lens, seeing the delays and seeing the inefficiencies. And they're like, hey, we're seeing the trends where the delays are happening. Might make sense for you to really front the storefront.
So you've used this word a few times, partner or partnerships. So when you think of that overall with all components of your builds, do you find that having partners alongside you is a better way to increase productivity? Or what's your philosophy and how you find project partners to help you?
I do think that having a set of really strong partners do make good efficiency, especially if you work for a brand like us, right? And having to come from multiple legacy brands, I do see the benefits of having a strong partner, a handful of partners. But then again, I do feel like you get comfortable by having to work with only those partners because that's the danger of it, right? You get used to having to work with only those, let's say, three partners of project managers, the GCs, and the AORs. So I I do see the benefits and the danger of it. However, because the brand is so specific in their design concept, it's hard to reteach the design detail and the workmanship of their philosophies and the know-hows to the AOR and the GCs. So it's hard to say, but I think when you work for, let's say, LVMH or Kering, it's hard to always go out to the first four GCs and five GCs on every single project.
Do you have any philosophy or thinking about how to protect or hold your partners accountable so you don't have that fear creep in at all about getting too comfortable? Have you explored how to safeguard you and your...
I always try to be just upfront with them and not to kind of have them accountable all the time. But again, I do try to read all of their drawings and all the contracts. And I think my architect knows that I do read every single page of their drawings. I think they do appreciate the fact that as a client, I know their drawings inside out. And I think that's why we, as both parties, are both accountable, right? And that's the respect. It goes both ways. It's a mutual respect because, again, if I miss the fine notes on my AOR's drawings, it comes back to me as a client. And same thing, if AOR misses their notes on their drawings, then it's going to come back to me as a change order. So again, I think it's a mutual thing for us as a brand and for me as a client. I do think that there's benefits to run your projects. I've implemented the QS as part of project management team so that part of my project team includes AOR, QS, so that there is kind of a full cohesive team who checks and balances the entire project. So there's AOR who runs obviously the full project, but there's also a team of QS who runs the numbers and who checks all the change orders and, does the cash flow of the entire project so that we are looking at the entire project
Cool. That's awesome.
360.
That's awesome. So Jenny, in your experience, when maybe you haven't, but often in construction, it's a journey and sometimes things don't go as well as we expect and there is performance breakdowns. So any thoughts or experiences or thinking on when you see projects productivity break down, is there any common denominators that you see that you pay particular attention to going forward? Or, what kind of experiences do you have when things don't go the way they're planned? Or maybe that never happens in your life though.
Things that don't go plan I haven't come across that too much yet, unless it's a force majeure. I guess like for retail, because we are so fast paced that no matter what, we have to open. So the worst case scenario is that we're late by maybe a month or two. So I think for luxury retail, at some point, we do have to open. So the worst case is delayed by for a few months. I think the most inefficiency that I come across is probably the lack of communication between each parties, right? Between the client, AOR, and the GCs. And I think I always, as a client, really highlight the fact that we're in the same boat. So let's make sure that we're not finger pointing and we're all heading towards the same goal. I always tell everyone on my team that please make sure that if there's an issue on the site, if there's any issues that come up, we're in this together and let's work it out. It's not about whose fault or who did the wrong. We're in this together. So let's just work it out together. And that's how I would like to run my job. It's not about blaming game and finger pointing. And I think that's the most critical thing to get things done.
Yeah. I know at Cornerstone, we work really hard at building this philosophy that we're project partners and the project is the thing we're working for. Our attitude is that it doesn't matter. What matters is the store gets opened and your customer, who I call your operations team, that they're happy at the end of the day because the store's opened and the staffing's working and everything's working. So, but it can be countercultural in some cases because often adversarial relationships can rise up because there is that finger pointing, but we always strive to sort all that out as we go along. But let's focus on a solution and get that solution resolved first, and then we can work through the challenges that we might have as a result of something that came up. So yeah, that's great. Would you
Totally.
say there is one particular place that you see we got communication that can fail? Like, do you have a philosophy about pre-construction? If we cut corners in pre-construction, we can get ourselves in trouble.
I think pre-construction really matters, like the most important thing. And I do put a huge essence on this to my PM as well. Um, and having the right set of contract document is probably the most critical thing because that sets the tone of your entire project. So going back to my point about how I read all of my drawings, that sets my base bid number. That's the number that I sign my A101. And that's basically the number that I'm going to be charged to. And that's the basis of my change order. That is very much the foundation of the start of construction. So do you think that when you're starting a project, you have to start thinking about, okay, what am I building and what do I want to build? So even before we start looking at the GCs, the space, I tell my PMs to think about, okay, think about a white box. What is the white box mean to you? What are we given? What is the utility given? Like, what are we building? What is the lease condition? What do we need to look for? And then really start imagining this space in 10 years. How are we vacating this space? And then what, as a PM, do you need to build this space? What are your teams? What, as a PM, are you going to do to make this project successful? So they have to start thinking as a PM, their project team members and how they're going to start planning, okay, who is my project team, architects, MEP engineers? How long am I going to need to basically build out my project schedule, permitting time? So it's a full project life cycle, right? And yeah, it's critical.
Yeah, awesome. Awesome. Well, Jenny, as you look out into the future, is there any trends that you think we should be, as an industry, paying particular attention to? Anything that you've got your eye on saying, hey, I'm really watching these 2 or 3 things to see how they unfold, or any thoughts on what we should be doing as an industry?
I do think that AI is pretty much going to be tied to our industry at some point. It's creeping up, obviously. I know there's a lot of tools in design that's creeping up. I have a team in Asia Pacific who's actually cranking out design options as we speak on our Asia Pacific stores. So I think that's going to actually change the industry quite a bit. The way that we design is not going to be how we're used to design. So it's going to really change the architecture world. So I'm kind of curious to see how that's going to evolve construction as well.
What's your personal opinion on AI? Are you engaged? You think it's good? Do you think it's bad? Are you indifferent? Are you engaged in it a fair amount?
I am interested. I'm curious to learn more about it. I do think that it's going to be a useful tool if used the right way. I do use AI pretty heavily on admin side, not on design side because I'm not too savvy yet, but I do ask my APAC architects to use it heavily on design exercise, on doing iterations, doing millwork studies, doing different design exercise, because I do think that is useful. And I think it's going to open up quite a bit of, interesting sectors.
Yeah. I just recently listened to a podcast with Simon Sinek on it, The Diary of the CEO, and they ended up talking a lot about AI. And part of what he was referring to is the importance that it is going to improve many things, but we can't lose sight that humans need connection, and people that have the ability to connect and communicate and can use AI, that's still going to be very important for us to have those skills to be able to connect and communicate person to person, team to team. So it was quite an interesting podcast to listen to. What's your view looking forward on sustainability? Do you have a view on that at all? Does Canada Goose have a policy on sustainability? What are you thinking there?
Yeah. So in Canada Goose for store development specific, we do actually started to launch a goal recently, actually this year, start collecting data. We recently implemented a system called Reset, where we started to collect data on all of our construction materials. So it pretty much collects where we purchase our materials, bill of materials, where we buy the materials from, the origination of the materials, and basically the makeup and how we collect it and how we demolish it, how it gets recycled. So it's not like lead per se, but it's like a life cycle of the material, and we start tracking it just because I think our sustainability team would like to have those data to track it and how, as a brand, we are keeping tabs on construction material and just be mindful of our construction material in general. Our product itself is obviously there's a full sustainability team, so we are definitely very much tied to sustainability. In the past, different brands that I've worked in, there was sustainability and lead programs that different brands have been very much tied to. However, I do personally feel like being in a luxury brand, it is a little bit greenwashed. Just because it's a little bit of an oxymoron, right? Because if you're working for a luxury brand, there's a constant refurbishment of fixtures. But then if you're talking about sustainability, how green can you be? So it's a bit of a sour topic for me because, again, coming from architecture field, being in that sector, doing LEED Platinum, I really saw that sector being really sustainable, but coming into retail side, just kind of nibble at it.
Well, one bite at a time, right?
Yeah.
Thanks again, Jenny, for taking the time to be with us today. I appreciate your insights and wisdom. If anyone wanted to connect with you, what's the best way for people to connect with you?
Yeah, anyone can reach me on LinkedIn.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks to those that are listening today. And Jenny, I look forward to getting to Chicago to see this amazing storefront. And this podcast is Behind the Barricade, brought to you by Cornerstone, where we're dedicated to creating a better journey for our clients, our staff, our project partners, and ultimately the world. So thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Man, what a conversation with Jenny. There are a few things from this one that I really wanted to make sure stick out to you. First, that Oak Brook story. Jenny had a store that was derailed by government shutdown and a hard deadline that was not moving. And she made a call she had never made before. She engaged a storefront vendor and started fabrication before even having a GC on board. She called it a leap of faith. And that leap of faith saved her roughly 3 months on the schedule. That's not a small thing. That's the difference between opening for the peak season and missing it entirely. This lesson goes beyond the storefronts. It's about having the confidence to make bold procurement decisions early when the situation demands it, rather than waiting for every piece to be perfectly in place. It takes trust and confidence in your project partners and making sure they're all aligned. Secondly, Annie talked about reading every page of her architect's drawings. She said accountability is mutual. If she misses something in those drawings, it comes back to her. If the architect misses something, it comes back as a change order. So both sides stay sharp because they know the other's paying attention. And that's how you build real accountability without it being adversarial. At Cornerstone, we strive hard at always bleeding over the drawings, making sure full alignment and holding all the parties accountable. And the third, I loved her honesty on sustainability and luxury retail. She's someone who came from architecture, who's done LEED Platinum work, and she was refreshingly real about the tension between constant fixture refurbishment and genuine sustainability. But she's also part of a team at Canada Goose that's starting to track the full life cycle of construction materials, one bite at a time, as we said.